So leading up to October 31st, did you think there was going to be a plea deal for a Young Thug? I know that's not your client, but that is the main person in the trial.
Sure.
Did you see things start to move and shift where it's like, oh, okay, the prosecution is finally going to offer some sort of plausible plea deal where he would take it?
That was kind of a weird week. Was the 31st the day he actually took the plea?
Yep.
Okay.
Correct.
That was a weird week leading up to that, because if you remember right, that was when the judge basically recessed the trial and encouraged everyone to go into negotiations while she decided on whether or not to make a ruling on a mistrial. So that lit a fire under the state to get them to be more reasonable in their plea negotiations with us. Did I think Jeffrey Williams was going to take a plea? Well, I knew there'd been conversations going back and forth between all of us in the state. And I wasn't sure that he was going to take a plea until the very moment that he did. Because if you recall, they got very close, okay? They got very close to what's called a negotiated plea, where they reached an agreement. But there were some terms that just, Jeffrey couldn't agree to those. He wouldn't have been able to perform as an artist under those terms. His career would have been effectively over. How can he agree to that? So instead, he decided to do a non-negotiated plea. And I can explain that if you'd like.
Please do.
A non-negotiated plea is one where you're going to plead guilty, but you haven't reached an agreement with the prosecutors. You haven't reached an agreement with the prosecutors on exactly what the terms will be on the sentence. Okay? So it is a super high stakes maneuver. You go in, you plead guilty. The prosecution says, this is what we want for a sentence. The defense says, this is what we think the sentence should be. Here's all the mitigating factors. And then the judge decides. So Jeffrey Williams, Young Thug, he put his entire future, his faith in the hands of Judge Whitaker, and that Judge Whitaker was going to do right by him. And the nerves it took to do that, because people are talking about he copped out and took a plea. I mean, bullshit. What he did took nerves to do that, to go in there and have faith that the judge was going to make a fair sentence. So when it first happened, if you were watching, when it first happened, the judge said, Mr. Williams, I understand we're going to do a non-negotiated plea today. Is that correct? This was maybe 1 p.m. And there was silence in the courtroom. Jeffrey Williams, Young Thug, sat there for about a minute, just silence. It's the most tension I've ever felt in a courtroom. And after about a minute, the judge said, do you need a little more time to speak to your lawyer? And he said, yeah, I do. And they went back and they talked for another hour, and he came out and took the plea. So did I think it was going to happen? I suspected it was, but I wasn't exactly sure until he did it.
Okay, because the prosecution wanted something like 20 years in prison as their plea. And, of course, the defense wanted time served.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the judge decided on 5 years time served and 15 years probation.
Yeah, basically with the 5 years going on the back end or the 15 years going on the back. Anyway, the time going on the back end. So I think he got a really good sentence from the judge. And by the way, what the judge sentenced him to was almost identical to what the negotiated plea would have been without all the onerous conditions. Okay? So he got a very fair deal out of this. Now, what would have happened if he would have stuck with the trial? I suspect he would have gotten a not guilty along with the rest of us that did remain. But did he know that in October? No. I mean, he didn't know that. I believe Brian Steele said in open court, I've advised against this. I think we should go to the jury. So that's not confidential that Brian felt that way. But you're asking to do that, you're asking Jeffrey to spend another 6 months, 7 months, 8 months locked up in the Cobb County Jail, away from his family that needs him, away from his children. That's asking a lot of someone. So I criticize anyone that criticizes Jeffrey for taking that deal. You're not in that position.
Yeah, I actually looked it up. The state actually requested 45 years with 25 years to serve and 20 on probation.
Well, see, you know what's so shitty about that is that, so in the negotiating process, that's not what they were offering. And the reason I can say this publicly is this was a very unusual thing. The judge had the state put on the record, what is it you offered in a negotiated plea? So the judge knew what that was, which is basically eventually what the judge gave. But then what the state asked for in the non-negotiated was, ridiculous. What, 40 years?
45 years, 25 years to serve.
It's ridiculous, ridiculous. That's the trial tax that prosecutors charge U.S. citizens to exercise our constitutional rights. That's the trial tax. And the judge didn't go for that, rightfully so.